Good evening. Welcome to the Concerned Citizens for Good Government meeting. Tonight's guest is HaroldSchoeffler. He's a distinguished environmentalist. Our next meeting is going to be 2 weeks from this Monday. It'll be March 21st, and our guest speaker at that time will be Superintendent Lafayette Parish School Board, Dr. Don Aguilar.
Thank you, Frank. All of us know, Mr. Schoeffler very, very well. We've introduced him in the last speaking, but I want to do one thing here this evening, that we know him and he's been an exceptional citizen here in Lafayette, Louisiana. He's done some real great things, worked with kids for all his life, just about, and an environmentalist, as we all know him, and we appreciate everything that he and Sarah are doing for us. His whole family has been very supportive, and we want to thank you for being here with us this evening. It's such an important issue, and I hope that we can get the point across. Thank you very much for being here, Harold.
Thank you.
All right, I got here because I think Carol and some of the members called about getting someone from DEQ to report to us. We pay these guys salaries, and Carol asked us to come up with a list of issues that we'd like for the public relations person for the Department of Environmental Quality to deal with. And I'll go over that list, but before I do that, I want to talk generally about water quality and how important it is, and some of the battles that have been dealt with around the country. Then I'll get to the issue at hand, our own water supply, and the threats that are there involving our drinking water. So we came up with a list of questions, and I guess that's what scared them off. What monitoring wells are on the BNSF railroad site and the closed Lafayette Grand Street power plant between the Simcoe and the Evangeline Thruway and so forth, that area that we think of the rail yard. Then I'm going to respond to these issues and talk a little bit about water quality. The monitoring wells are put down, and they're supposed to be inspected and the contents analyzed, usually for very specific insults. You can't just get a sample of water and send it to a lab and say test for everything. Tests are very expensive, and the various chemicals that are out there are in the tens of thousands. So you can't just go out and say test for, all the bad stuff out there. That test might cost $50 million if you could even pull it all together just on one sample of water. So you have to deal with very specific insults. Now, the monitoring wells that they talk about at the rail yard and at the Grand Street power plant mainly deal with benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. There's another chemical they call TC, trichloroethylene. These are all organic chemicals, mostly related to oil. And the fuel that was used in the trains, the steam trains, and also that same fuel was used in the Grand Street power plant. The Grand Street power plant operated from 1897 till 1951. And one of the big threats with running a power plant is you want to keep this thing going. You don't want anybody's lights going out, especially going out for 3 or 4 days or 3 or 4 weeks. So you make sure you got all the fuel you need. Now, the big worry in that issue was railroad strikes. The strike might last 30 days. All the fuel to the Grand Street power plant came from trains. So to deal with that possibility of a lengthy railroad strike, they kept 6 tank cars on a sidetrack. The sidetrack is still there. And they also put underground swimming pool tanks. That was the real problem, because those tanks leak like a sieve. Now, number 6 bunker fuel oil only sold for 2 cents a gallon. So even in those days, people were not too worried about a little leak. But over a period of 50+ years, that amounts to a lot, and it's all going in the ground, and it doesn't go away. Now, in some geologic formations, gas leak, diesel that's leaking out of filling station tanks end up in a strata that allows pumping, removal by pumping. Our soil at the rail yard and around the Grant Street site doesn't allow for that. It just kind of saturates the soil. Our soil is a low soil. It's a soil that was deposited by retreating glaciers over mega millions of years. And so that type of soil base just doesn't allow for pooling of water, of fuel. It saturates it. So the only way to solve it is to remove it. Now you got something that's happening all the time. It's always going down. It's always moving out in all directions. And it involves the volatile organic chemicals that are always coming up. Volatile organic chemicals means it readily evaporates. And so it's always coming up, leaving a residue on the grass. And then when the rain comes, guess what? It washes off, and then it goes downstream to the ditches, into the bayou ultimately, and down the way. Same thing with the rail yard. The rail yard had a bunch of other stuff. Every chemical that was shipped by rail ended up in their dump ponds. Dynamite is stored there in unknown sites. That's according to the case. And they didn't want to let people know where the dynamite was because they were afraid if during the strike somebody might grab a few sticks and blow a rail loose or cause problems with it. So there's a lot of unknowns out there that has to be dealt with. And a lot of it involves the water quality issue. Dr. Bruce Darling did a $60,000 study for the city of Lafayette, and it dealt with the possibility of how these wells that are feeding our drinkers' water, if they could be subject to movement of these waste materials into them. And it's very complex of how they test these wells and determine if a well is susceptible to that issue at all. So they have to look at, and this was what Darling's study did, this is 2005, it looked at the age of the water in the 16 wells that we use to supply our water, our drinking water. Most of the wells we're dealing with water that's thousands of years old. So it's not likely those wells would ever get any surface contamination. There's a chemical that's a radioactive material that they deal with half-life. And one of the chemicals that he writes about is a chemical with a 50-year half-life. So if you find that in a well, and it's it's got 30 years left, then you know the age of the water. It's the process of aging water. 3 of our wells, the one on Mud, the one on First, and the one at the visitor station, have waters less than 50 years old. So when you look at the rail yard and the Grant Street power plant, that material could easily migrate into those wells. Now, of course, the issue is we're not testing for the chemicals that could be in there that I'm aware of. We do priority testing, priority pollutants every month. It is done by each well, and the VOCs that are in number 6 bunker are not included. So the monitoring wells that are out there, the last ones that were tested were probably in the early 2001, 2002. Lafayette put one down at the site of the old main administration building for Southern Pacific, and that was in '98, and found out there was a lot of bad stuff, I guess, because they abandoned it. There were wells put in the residential areas in 2001, 2002, and they were quickly abandoned. There are 5 monitoring wells at the Grant Street station. They're there. I don't know if they're being tested, how frequently they're being tested, but the wells are certainly there, and they're real easy to see. So as far as we know, there's no testing currently going on at all for the chemicals in the rail yard and at the Grand Street Power Plant. So you wonder, DEQ, you know, they are there to protect our water system, and they don't test those areas. What are they doing? What steps, I'm going to go back over this, what steps are being taken to work with DOTD to ensure that testing procedures do not allow hazardous materials to reach the Chico Aquifer? I delivered a copy of the Consolidated Companies suit to the headquarters of DOTD in Baton Rouge with a wish that they turned it over to their legal counsel, which they did, and as a result, they've stopped all activity on the rail yard and the Grand Street Power Plant site. So they are working definitely with DOTD. That's not a result of DEQ doing anything. That's just a result of a citizen saying, you got a federal court and a Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans said there's highly contaminated sites, and you know, as a result of that, they would have a legal problem because a lawsuit that's been filed over it. If anybody went and started boring holes, and to be able to prepare a project of this type for bid, it is required that one, they survey the footprint of the project, and two, in the footprint where there are pilings, they have to bore to the resistance depth for each piling. That's just drilling a hole 80 to 120 feet, maybe deeper, so that the contractor knows that piling 1A is 51 feet long, piling 2B is 71 feet long. So they know how much to bid on that. And then they have to deal with soil density. Because if you got gumbo under the ground a foot or two, you're not going to put a big highway on top of it that'll last very long. So soil density is very important. And then cores. A core is just drive-up piling that's got a hole in it that can be opened up. It goes to the lab, and they open this up, and they look at what's underneath the highway project. And then they have to do soil compaction test. Soil compaction is just how if you drill a hole, if you, for instance, dig a hole in your yard and you dig up 3 cubic yards, when you pile up the dirt on the ground, it's going to be 5 cubic yards. And it, you know, in your yard, that soil is compacted for 1 million years. So it's compacted as it can be. But to build a highway, they have to do all those tests, which very much affect the contaminants that are there and the ability of the contaminants to move down and around through the site. One of the things with water quality, whenever you look at water quality and a city's water quality issues and they're using groundwater, one of the most important issues is landfills. The landfills, you know, back in the day, there was nothing to separate them from going into the waste in those landfills from going into the groundwater. So when you do an analysis of the viability of someone's water supply in a community, the first thing you look for the landfills. Now, we got a bunch of them. We got one at UL, just up the street. They got a 10 acres. That's contaminated 40 feet down. It was a wonderful deal. We somehow, the city owned it, and when they bought the horse farm, the university ended up with that landfill. It's about 150 million, 200 million to clean up. You know, who appraises this kind of stuff? Who could have, you know, the banks have got smarter. They won't get mortgaged on a property that's contaminated. But the city took this 8 acres, they got a dog park on it, they got playgrounds on it. That should never be done. Because all the waste is going down, it's going out of the sides, and it's going up. and it ends up on the clothes of the children that are playing there. It ends up in the runoff that goes into the coulees that ends up in the bayou. We have one at University of Vermilion Bayou at the Public Works Building. We drive through over that one every day. When they built the Public Works Building, they found out there was cars and washing machines and stumps and stuff they could not put a foundation on. It took them almost a year to dig up the crap and put dirt back and compact it to be able to build that building. Carmel Avenue at Long Bridge. It's a playground. And you drive on the street and you look in the ditch and somebody just said, God, can you see, look all the trash that's there, you know, all the bottles and cans and all kinds of stuff sticking out, old boots sticking out. Yeah, I mean, it's a landfill. And we got a playground on it. Larry B. Pitt. That was our Lafayette landfill for about 7 or 8 years. Lake Martin Road at Vermilion Bayou. Big old landfill for about 5 or 6 years. And Dugal was the most recent one. And Louisiana Avenue at the coulee approaching the Target Mall. And the reason DEQ is not here is they're obligated to monitor these things. All of them are close to the bayou. You know, the one at Target Mall is only, you know, a couple of 100 yards from the bayou. There's a coulee right there. They rearranged and redredged the coulee right through it. Then one of the things that was asked of DEQ, what are the issues that are considered when issuing no further action, this NFAT, where further monitoring done on these railroad sites. You know, the railroad site, and this is something that Union Pacific hid behind, is DEQ inspected it and said there's no further action required. Wow. That didn't make a lot of sense, and why these things issued, I have to think it might be something to do with, you know, politics, lobbying, whatever, influences decision makers to not do the right thing in behalf of the public. What are the differences in a residential and industrial? No further action testing site. Residential, of course, has a lot tighter restrictions on chemical insults. In industrial sites, it almost allows anything. One of the things that they deal with industrial sites is they should have tested the Chico and the runoff, surface runoff, to see if this is going into the bayou and getting into the whole, the Vermilion Bayou ecosystem. And is there chemical testing on the Vermilion River Bayou, including the sediments? There's probably some of that going on because the Vermilion Bayou is part of a federal court ruling that required the state and the Environmental Protection Agency to make our waters fishable and swimmable. And that was a lawsuit filed by the Sierra Club in about 95, 96. Those waters are still under that court order and mandate, and they are tested in line with that. And that's mainly through EPA and Region 6 in Dallas. So our Chico Aquifer, you know, we've been involved in lots of issues that affect the Chico. The Chico is a viable aquifer, is constantly being recharged. It's called the Chico Schoeffler aquifer. When the river gets real high, like we had a month or so ago, it's recharging. We probably will never run out, but our challenges to the Chico involve contamination mostly. And the biggest threat of contamination is salinity. The Vermilion Bayou was the westernmost tract of the Mississippi, and it's about 3 ice ages back. There's a 1949 LSU study that did the borings and identified where the river was and the sands related to it. During that ice age, the seas were 375 feet lower than they are now. And so where we are now is equivalent to Shreveport in relation to the Gulf. The Gulf was 200 miles to the south. So it's an entirely different system. So, and the river itself is 150 feet deep, and the seas are 375 feet lower. So you can imagine that river in bed and the sands related to it is 500 feet down. Now it follows the Vermilion, and it goes from a few miles out to many miles out, 6, 7 miles. And nature does a wonderful thing with our river systems. Generally speaking, nature will put a cover that separates surface water from groundwater. And one of the most ignored environmental issues in dredging canals in Louisiana is that issue. That we readily dredge through those natural barriers to allow the surface water right into our wells. Now the Boy Scouts have a 16-acre property right upriver from Abbeville, Camp Steed. We've drilled 10 different wells on that property. The last one was 650 feet deep. It was as far as the bayou, as far from the bayou as we could get on the 16 acres. And when we tested it and compared the water in the bayou, they were identical. So there's this direct communications. So when we talk about surface runoff, it may not go directly into our wells, but if it goes into the bayou, it's going to go into wells at all down the system. Private wells, the Abbeville wells, the Milton wells, probably the Maurice wells, all affected by the fact that the Vermilion was dredged and contamination of the river goes right in people's wells. That's the big issue with surface contamination, with the material that's on the rail yard. That during dry weather, hot weather, this stuff is evaporating as the soil heats up, and as it comes up, it's on the surface, and it washes off and goes right into the bayou, right into people's wells. And so another big factor with that Vermilion Trench is during very dry, long periods, water from the Gulf moves up. And that's verified by wells around Henry, around Esther. These wells are checked constantly for salinity during dry periods. And so that water, that salt water from the Gulf is moving in the Chico northward. So we've been fortunate that for many, many years we've had ample rain. But you can go back in the 20th century. We had one year we had 12 inches of rain. We had one year we had 14 inches of rain. Those periods, salinity would actually threaten our drinking water systems. To the point of closing them, probably not, but it still is something that's there. Then the next big issue is salinity from the bottom. The Chico bottoms out at about 700 feet. 200 feet below is a 2,000-foot highly saline aquifer. During heavy, heavy pumping, the plume comes up, can come right into the Chico. And that's agricultural pumping, these big massive pumping systems. And the horrific thing about well water, it's something that belongs to the state. It doesn't belong to you as a property owner, it belongs to the state. And we have no permit system. You can put any kind of well and pump till you're blue in the face. We have no permits for surface water. We don't have any charges for it. You go to Texas, and if you put a well down, one, you gotta have a permit. Two, you gotta pay $125 a surface acre foot. And Mississippi is $40, Arkansas is $25. So what's happening is people are putting a well from Mississippi on the Louisiana side and getting the water free. And the same in Arkansas, and the same is going to happen in Texas. There's no rules to protect it. And these big, massive wells are the threat of polluting our water system. water quality is something so important, and I'm going to cite a couple of examples of how things really go bad. Usually, water quality problems are discovered not by DEQs or EPAs. They're discovered usually by the medical community. Phoenix, Arizona is one of the worst. Town of, I don't know, 1.5 million people, 2 million people, and its water supply was completely shut down. They drilled wells 25 miles away. And it was polluted with a solvent that was being used by Motorola in their process of manufacturing electronics. They would use this solvent and they would dump it in little ponds and pits like the railroad did. With this solvent, particular solvent, had two big problems. One, it went through the sandy soil of the Arizona, Phoenix area, like lightning, and then it ended up in the drinking water, and it had affected leukemia. Doctors in Phoenix started realizing, wow, our childhood leukemia rates are off the charts. And it took years to find out where the problem was. This doesn't happen automatically, as somebody just guess it right away why they have this problem. And so they had to set up at Motorola's expense. And by the way, Motorola had just written a book about avoiding legal sharks and lawyers that took advantage of good corporations. They just literally wrote a book on it. And so about 3 months after that book was published, they were sued by 56,000 households in the city of Phoenix. And part of the suit involved decontaminating that aquifer under Phoenix. And it's one of those that lends itself to pumping into the air. They have these giant sprayers that's going to take 25 years. The material that is a volatile organic compound, it readily evaporates in the spray. So that's how they decontaminate it. And of course, Flint, Michigan. Wow. Flint, Michigan, you know, we all have pipes that are subject to erosion, especially if the water is acid or base. You get a little acidity, and all our old plumbing pipes, a lot of galvanized pipes, that's lead, ends up, all those with copper pipes in your house, you got lead solder that holds them together. And if you get acid water going through the system, it's going to end up in your pot, so to speak. And you know, lead is bioaccumulative. It's like arsenic. A little bit just adds up. It doesn't leave, so you're stuck with it. So all Flint did was they were getting the water originally, I think, from one of the Great Lakes, and they switched to the Flint River, and they didn't worry about the acidity. And so before they knew it, this would have been about $100 a month to bring the acid level to neutral. Wow. And they have all these kids with lead poison, 5-year-olds that are functioning like 2 years old, and there's no fixing this. I mean, it's just horrible to the children of that area. And you think that's not an economic issue? Would you want to eat in a restaurant in Flint? Would you want to go to a motel in Flint? Do you want to build a home there? They don't need a Chamber of Commerce. So these issues are super important. And I'll just mention some of the fights we've been involved in Lafayette in terms of water quality. The Vermilion Bayou was the most polluted waterway in all of the United States. And there were battles over it, and the city said we're doing a fine job and all this. And the biggest problem was sewage. Lafayette at the time, and this is in the early 80s, we had 4 sewer plants. Altogether, the sewer plants could handle 7 billion gallons a day of water. But we were putting 12 million gallons a day. There was a problem. The sewer plant's kind of like a bucket of perfectly clear water. If you got that 5-gallon bucket of good water and you drop 1 drop of crap in it, the whole bucket's ruined. Well, the same with a sewer plant. It operates at a capacity. You cannot operate on 101%. It can operate at 99%, but when you go to 101%, The whole mess is messed up for that day's movement of water through it. And so the plants were well run. Our plants, the fluid from the plants was tested and met all the standards and so forth. But quietly they were bypassing 5-6 million gallons a day right to the bayou. Now, when you talk about cleaning up the bayou, people in Maurice and Milton and Breaux Bridge and everybody up and down the system, Lafayette so bad, why should we worry about cleaning up? Then on top of it, Lafayette Parish has 26, in 1984, a study done by Pete Hoppy Engineering, 26,000 unserved homes. And you start adding up that going to the bayou, plus the 5 or 6 million a day. So anyway, we figured, wow, how would we get politicians to move on this? It took a year for the Sierra Club to find out what is the problem. Is there a medical problem with that? And one alarm bell was cholera. In '78, we had a cholera scare. We had a bunch of cholera cases, and nearly all of the Vermilion watershed. It shut down the seafood restaurants. It shut down the seafood industry for the state. And so that was kind of a bell ringer. So we, at a mayor's race, one of the issues we asked for, would the mayor candidates want to work with solving this problem? Douglas Strauss was one of them that said, yeah, we'll work with it, you know. And it was ho-hum until we went and met with him, and well, a meeting with the engineers, nothing really going on, you know, other than, you know, a pat on the back and say it's a good cause, but we don't know what we're going to do. But then the Atlanta Disease Control Center, we got a hold of the waterborne disease rates. And this is hepatitis, A, B, C, unspecified, shigellosis, cholera, Georgia, the whole list of them. And we were looking at Lafayette Parish and Vermilion Parish. Now, when we looked at Louisiana as a whole, the state figures was half the national average for all those different waterborne diseases. We're in good shape, right? Vermilion and Lafayette Parish was 6 times the national average, 12 times the state average. There's one of these hepatitis, I don't remember which one, Steve, that affects young ladies on the pill, would end up with runaway fever and an out of control fever, and it was about 50% fatal. In the year we were looking at it, 37 young ladies in Vermilion and Lafayette died, including the nurse of one of the state physicians. So what do you do with a piece of dynamite like that? You know, to go to the press is, the politicians, you know, you throw in grenades in their foxhole, they're going to put up all kinds of defenses. So we went to the mayor and said, take a look at this. And I said, we just feel that public health has to be your #1 reason you're in office, your #1 responsibility. Look at this. You got a real problem. And Lafayette's at the top of the list of the problem. Because you dumping 5 or 6 million gallons a day untreated sewage into the bayou. And that ends up literally back on our plates. From crabs, from oysters, from shrimp, crawfish, that's pumped, the water's pumped into crawfish ponds. Go down the list, it literally ends up back on our plates. And Doug said, hey, we gotta fix it. So the next day we had a meeting with the engineers, and it was, how are we gonna get it done? And it ended up, we needed, I don't know, $50 million to build new plants and plumbing, and we needed 25 cents a 1,000 gallons increase in the sewer prices. Went to the city council, the mayor just said, we got a health problem in this community, we can fix it by building the new sewer plants and the plumbing to it, and we have to raise the rates 25 cents. That was it, 5 minutes was done. So those new plants were built with enough reserve capacity to go far beyond Lafayette. EPA wanted us to include the 35 subdivisions with inadequate sewage. So Lafayette ends up with a sewer system that's probably one of the best in the country, certainly the best in the state of any major city. And that's because somebody is saying, you know, politicians responding in a very positive way to health issues. So our water is a big part of that. Just very briefly, I'm going to mention another big issue about water quality. One is the Schoeffler Basin and crawfish. They've filed a bunch of lawsuits to deal with water quality, and it's all about crawfish dying in the nets, and dead crawfish are not saleable. So they've sued all companies, and the state was involved, and one of the engineering firms here in Lafayette went crying to the governor, got the governor to pull out. So, but anyway, they prevailed, and hopefully water quality will improve in the basins. But one of the big water quality issues for the whole state is shell dredging. We had 14 dredges. Each of them put out 300 to 450,000 gallons per minute of really bad stuff. They were dredging up the bottom, and if they went through an oil field, all the old waste oil, all the old cuttings and drilling mud that was dumped in the bottom, that all came out. And there's 14 of these dredges working. So when you start doing the math, in 1 hour, they were putting out as much bad water as all the sewage in the state put out in a day. And to deal with it, we got DEQ involved, we sued them. And it really wasn't a suit. The Administrative Procedures Act, any citizen can request an adjudicatory hearing, a judgment hearing, on water quality issues. So we put before the court, the question is, we found out the shell dredge, they had a permit to dig up the bottom and kick it out the back and keep the shells. The shells would go through this big vacuum, liquid vacuum cleaner would pick it up and move it against a screen, like a hurricane fence. And that would catch the shells and drop it to a conveyor where the shells were washed. So the legal issue became, is washing processing? And do you need a permit for that? Do you need it, and should you get it? That's before the court. This went through 29 days of trial. A lot of money on the table. This is hundreds of millions of dollars of profits made by the companies that do this. We didn't have gravel roads, we had shell roads. We didn't have gravel parking lots, we had shell parking lots, because shells were cheaper. They were pretty white roads, it was great. But we were dredging up our world. We were dredging up the oyster reefs. We were dredging up Lake Pontchartrain. Horrible impacts on water quality. An amazing part of this, I filed this motion, had one lawyer with me, and we go into the hearing room 9 o'clock in the morning, and in walks Attorney General Billy Gus and Ian Lindsay and Bill Goodell, who's been to these meetings here. Bill's about 3 weeks out of law school, literally his first case. That's why I met Bill. And the general walks up to me and Mike Osborne, their attorney, and now there's 50 lawyers on the other side of the room. DEQ has 3 or 4 lawyers, Paul Tomplay is a defendant, and 6 shell companies, all have 4 or 5 lawyers, all the experts lined up. So I would think Mr. Gus, as the Attorney General for the state of Louisiana, was here to defend the Secretary of DEQ. So I greeted him and I made some harsh comments to the guys on the other side of the room. And I said, I guess you're out there to help those bastards. Well, not really, Harold. So he handed me a piece of paper, and on it was a quote from the Louisiana Constitution. The chief water quality enforcer for the state of Louisiana is the Attorney General. He said, that's me. And he said, I want to sit at the table with you. And we want to defend the waters of this state. I said, General, I know you didn't come here unprepared. So we certainly welcome, and we need all the help we're glad that we won that. And that stopped shell dredging. That's why it ended. And so often I would just say, you know, dealing with public issues, learning about them, learn all you can if you want to make a difference, learn all you can, learn the rules and the regulations, and work on them in your favor. You know, it's great to have the knowledge that we as citizens live in a great country. We have enormous rights to make changes for the good. When we see something that shouldn't be, you might be the only one seeing it and caring about it, so you have the responsibility of doing something about it. So it's something we as citizens should certainly be always aware of. If you see something going on, somebody piling up garbage in the woods or dumping, barrels of crud into the drain, report those things. And it's very important that citizens play a role in making this a better community, a better state, and a better country. And we can all do our part. So with that, I'll close and answer your questions.
Harold, several months back, the LUS director, Terry Huball, came, and he, if I remember correctly, he told us that we have the best drinking water probably in the nation. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
I would almost totally agree with that. Been involved in that issue. I interviewed Dr. Bruce Darling, who did this study. He's probably one of the nation's top experts on groundwater, aging of groundwater. That's a technology, that's a science all by itself, and it all deals with radioactive material. It deals with the bombs that were dropped in 1942 and 1963. This left a radioactive imprint that ends up in our groundwater, but it's useful in dating and aging. Of the 16 wells, we have probably 13 that the water, by his tests, are thousands of years old. We have 3 wells that's not, so if that ever proved to be a problem, we certainly could shut those off. We can easily meet our needs with the existing wells and drill new wells in a location where those completely safe wells are. The wells that we're talking about are generally on the municipal golf course. They are about 600 to 650 feet deep. They go through about 50 feet of light clay, low density clay. This loose material moved in from the retreating glaciers over millions of years. Then you have 48 feet of highly compressed shale. That's almost like concrete, highly compressed, very stable. And then below that, you have 450 feet of high-density gray clay. And that's all as a result of Darling's test. And so Terry Huball is absolutely right. We have the age of that water. Some of those wells is 6,000 years old, according to Darling's test. So we are fortunate. We probably have some of the best well water. But it doesn't, we have the wells that are off of Ridge Road. We have 2 wells that are not in what we call closed aquifers. They're in aquifer sites where the surface water is connected right to the aquifer. That's true generally in that whole Vermilion Trench. So you place like the rail yard that's allowing surface contaminants to roll into the Vermilion, that's ended up in people's well water all through that area. And that's real bad stuff. TCE, trichloroethylene, is much worse than benzene. Benzene is real bad. Benzene is directly related to kidney, liver cancer, and 9 different forms of leukemia. And but TCE is worse than that. And the appalling thing about this railroad responsibility is that BNSF is part of Berkshire Hathaway, who made $24 billion in 2015. BNSF Railroad, one of their own companies, made $2.8 billion. BNSF Railroad is the biggest railroad in the country. They are cleaning up 238 sites according to their 10K stock report. They're spending 500 to 750 million a year cleaning up those sites. And one of the big things they're cleaning up that's not mentioned in any of the case here was asbestos. That's mentioned extensively in the stock 10K report, and that's not mentioned at all. PCE is meant, trichloroethylene was what they washed the trains down as they got to the roundhouse. They just sprayed it with this stuff, and then they steam cleaned behind that. So that was all going around for almost 100 years. And that material is not mentioned in the court case. So there's a lot of unknowns about the case. So, but the fact that that material can go from the surface, we know it's in the groundwater at 8 and 20 feet. That groundwater is certainly going towards the millions. So that's a real threat to our health. And it may not be Lafayette's drinking water. It's Milton's drinking water. It's Abbeville's drinking water. It's the drinking water of all the people who have wells along that whole system and corridor.
You had mentioned earlier that boring or putting concrete pilings on the railroad sites would create certain dangers. But you also mentioned that before construction is done, that there's a mandate that specific safety measures be undertaken to ensure that you don't have the damage to the aquifer. With the I-10 construction, would you think that the mandates would be in place such that they would provide remedial measures up front to prevent danger to that area, no matter who pays for it?
The process of bringing a highway construction project to bid specifications requires 4 things that are corridors to pollution. One is at each piling site, you drill a 4-inch hole, and you don't fill it up. You got a 4-inch hole in the ground that goes to the sand. We don't have bedrock here. It goes to wet sand. That's what will stop a piling. So they drill, the holes that are being drilled that are not in the rail site but around, they drill roughly from 80 to 120 feet. And when they pull that drill out, it's the same type of drill they use for doing seismic holes. They use 300 or 400 gallons of water as a lubricant to lubricate the drill bit as it goes down. That all stays. When they pull it all up, you got a 4-inch hole in the ground that's 110, 20 feet deep. You know, it's when it rains, whatever is on the surface is going to go right down the hole, you can be sure. And if there's any contaminants that are in the path, say at 40 feet, we know it's going down to 43 feet, it goes to the groundwater. It goes to that wet sand, which we define as an aquifer. That's what stops the pile. Then you have to do corings. Coring is pile driven. It's not drilled. It's just pushed down. And it's a 3-inch pipe that you send to a lab, and they open the pipe up and they look at the different layering, and they're looking at soft spots in that layering, because when you put an enormous highway load on it, if you got soft spot, the highway comes apart. So that's 2. The next is the density, and that's just where the highway is flat on the ground. You have to deal with density. Low density material doesn't support a load. So if you're trying to put a highway at grade, at ground level, you have to know what the density is for about 8-10 feet below it. So they actually pull up this hunk of soil and they test it for density. And then they have to deal with compaction. If you drill a hole right here and you pick up 10 cubic yards, dig a hole that's 10 cubic yards, and you stack it up on the side, it's going to be 15 cubic yards on the side. Now you can't build a road on that 15 cubic yards. You could build a road where it was. So they have to deal with this density issue. So those four things all invite, a corridor and conduit for moving waste material right into groundwater and eventually landing in surface water and ultimately could be in our Chickawaw. And the amazing thing is, and that was mentioned in this court proceeding, no one tested to see if this waste is in the Chickawaw. And it's horrible they haven't tested. Now, the city did do this Bruce Darling study, and I'm sure they did it with very much in mind the concern for their old power plant, the Grant Tree Power Plant, and wondering if the wells that are right next to it are subject to that contamination, which Darling's report said they were. So the 3 wells with water less than 50 years old, and that's the Mud Street, the First Street, and the well at the visitor center. So, but again, if those should prove to be a problem, they could easily be shut off, closed completely. And I would say the city moved to test that. They're probably aware that those sites are vulnerable. Whether they have been contaminated or not, I don't know. We should know that. But as far as doing anything, you can't change the way highways are built. Anybody wants to get the Gold Book of Louisiana highway building. It's called the Gold Book. It lays out all the things in very specific detail about how you build and how you prepare to build a road. There's nothing you can do to change that. You don't build a road. But as far as saying you can mediate that some kind of way, you have to know the depth of the pilings. You have to drill a hole to get it. You have to do the coring. You're going to pull a pipe up. You're going to leave a hole. You got to dig up the ground to deal with density, and you have to deal with compaction. So all those things have insults and potentially damage to the water beneath.
Marshall, did you want to come up?
No, I just have a question.
Come on up.
You have to come up.
I have to come up?
Yes, sir.
If you want TV.
I don't know if this is pertinent or not, but I'm going to risk it.
Let me see your face.
Harold, my question is, I noticed in a lot of drainage areas now, particularly along Vero School Road, there's a lot of what appears to be PVC pipe putting in for drainage. And I'm wondering if you have any knowledge of the effects of aging or any of the chemicals mentioned on this PVC pipe used in drainage.
We're very fortunate that here in Lafayette we have separate sewerage and drain systems. And of course the plastic pipes can endure and they won't corrode and they're built to tolerate the loads that are over them. They're putting them in to build a highway over it, so, or near it. But the pipes we use today are pretty safe. They're not subject to acidity and cause a problem that way. So, probably some of these are water lines. They're all plastic now. And that's the main reason they're plastic, because they endure and can tolerate chemical insults without carrying it on into people's homes. So I think, they've become very aware of these problems and issues and have designed materials to bring much safer movement of water. And of course, very much to the benefit of the health of everybody around.
Is there any other questions possibly? Ed's doing a good job of taping this, so we want to make sure it's coming through the mic.
Okay, Harold, I know you've been talking about the Tesh Ridge as an alternate to the I-49 connector as proposed. And when I go to meetings, there are folks in the meetings who are working with DOTD and other organizations in town who are telling us that there's a heavy environmental impact on the Tesh Ridge. And I don't know, I can't imagine that coming from the group that's proposing it. So could you address that?
Yeah, sure. The confusion, I think, comes from the fact that the two east routes that were studied by DOTD in the environmental impact study was both through Cypress Island Swamp. And that's real expensive in lots of ways, not only in the dollars it takes to do it, but in the environmental impact. You know, the Cypress Island Swamp is a candidate site for a national park. We came that close to making those 30,000 acres a national park, working with Senator Johnson. And all the litigation, I mean, all the preparation needed to bring that to a decision of the Congress was all in place, ready to roll. And the Nature Conservancy comes in and convinces Texaco, who was the principal landowner, that they could manage it much better and much more to the benefit of Texaco's mineral rights. And so at the last minute, Texaco, who had agreed to turn it into a national park, went into an agreement with Nature Conservancy. So the land was protected and set aside. That's a special area. It only has one road through it. It has very little insults. It's an oxbow of the 60,000-year-old river. And Lake Martin is the back end of the deepest bend. And so it's a unique ecosystem. The sand that we get for all the Lafayette area comes from that old remnant river. And there's another oxbow left behind at the Big Woods in Vermilion Parish. And there's really two oxbows kind of in one. One oxbow went all the way about 5 miles to the west when you go through the woods right near Esther. And then somewhere in that history, it got cut off at about 2.5 miles. But the aerial pictures show that just beautifully. So to build a highway through it would just be really bad in terms of the environment. Very expensive because it's an area not like I-10 where we can get barges and cranes and heavy equipment, marine equipment to install it. This bridge would have to be built end over end. So you got to build it as you go off the end, so to speak, which doubles the expense. And so that was the reason they didn't go through there. And this whole idea of the Tesh Ridge came from a low water inspection in August, I don't know, many years ago with the Corps of Engineers. And the best part of that trip is the ice cream in the kitchen. And so everybody goes bring the ice cream machine in the kitchen, and at the ice cream machine was the secretary of DOTD at the time. And says, Harold, when are you going to get your Chamber of Commerce to straighten out the act? I said, what you're referring to? He says, they want to build $1 billion highway across your town. So that will never happen. You're not going to get $200 or $300 billion a mile to build an interstate highway. And you're not building a new road, you're just upgrading the existing Highway 90. There's no money for that. They can't get it through their head. There's never been money for that. And I said, what's the solution? He said, well, you got to find a way around Lafayette for around $400 million. So I went back with that and talked to Pierce Melton about it. He said, let's go check it out. So we got a GPS and a bunch of maps and did a lot of walking and hiking and laid out this highway. And then we went to the St. Martin Parish Council and said, Harold, you and Pierce are not engineers. Y'all have no idea what y'all doing. I said, yeah, but y'all can hire somebody. So they hired T. Baker Smith to do all the preliminary engineering. And the whole purpose was to avoid wetlands, to keep it all at grade at low cost, to not take anybody's homes or anybody's business. We didn't want to take any jobs. And that was the whole goal. And we laid out a plan that's 27 miles. that costs $17 million a mile. That's fundable through the interstate highway system. It's a new highway. It's hurricane evacuation, and it's 2 years to do it. Take 10 years to build it through Lafayette. So it can be funded just through interstate highway funds. It doesn't have any negatives in terms of wetlands or areas all out in open fields and cane fields. A good part of it is already owned by the federal government. There's a federal right-of-way between Brobridge and St. Martinsville, and we would use about 6 miles of that right-of-way. Now, it's total 1,200 acres. That probably would save about 200 acres of that cost, so to speak. So it's something easily done. If we could have gotten the, Lafayette Chamber to push behind it, we'd be driving on it now. But because it's easily done, I don't see any negatives. I met with the mayor today of St. Martinsville, and his response is, would you come to the city council? I want the city council to approve this thing. The St. Martin Chamber of Commerce approved it unanimously. The Rotary Club put together a statement in support of it. The project was funded by the St. Martin Parish Council, so we think it's something that they readily will accept, and it'll solve the problem of hurricane evacuation and thousands of people stuck on the road between Franklin and Lafayette. Because this would give, you'd still have the 3 lanes, and then you'd have 6 more lanes. So you would have double the capacity. And with the Evangeline through, it certainly needs improvement. We can get funding for that. One, because there's a need for hurricane evacuation, especially from Vermilion moving north. So 167 should have an overpass over the thruway. It's a block apart. It could be made into a beautiful boulevard and enhance the local traffic. It's going to be 90% local traffic, designed for local traffic. That doesn't take billions of dollars. That's something that's doable, all fundable, and it can happen. So, and it doesn't have this big negative impact on the community, on the environment, on our threats to water and support.
All right, if we had a mayor years back that had the foresight to think that we needed to get a sewer system going here, do you think that we have a new mayor, and I know he's very busy trying to figure out all of the stuff he's in charge of now, but our mayor president should be able to look at the disaster that he's getting ready to have put in this community. And I would hope that he would want to research it and look at it, because he's been elected by the people and for the people. And I think we need to go to him. Somebody needs to go to him. And now that we no longer have a chamber of Lafayette Chamber of Commerce, but one Acadiana, hopefully they will embrace the highway moving into other parts of other than just downtown Lafayette. So are we going to just sit and listen to Harold talk to us all the time about this? Or are we going to make a step forward? I mean, what do we do? What's the next step? It looks like one Acadiana doesn't even shake a head at this. I mean, DOTD is going to take care of all of that problem. And our mayor has not made a response to over 300 or 400 cards that have been sent to him. So I don't know what.
Yet.
Not yet.
Well, there are other mayors, and I spent half the morning with one of them today. And for them, it's about economic opportunities for communities that are dying. And it's also tourism is a big thing for our state. You put it over in St. Martin Parish, you at the door of the Schoeffler Basin. That's a natural wonder that's equal to Yellowstone. And it's probably second only to New Orleans as a spot of tourism. It's not Disney World. It's an area that's beautiful to behold, and allowing people to get to it easier is very important for our state and so forth. So, but the Mayo Bridge, the Mayo Parks, other communities, we're going to go knock on their doors. And I think we need to think beyond the box. It's not just Lafayette and the neighborhoods in Lafayette dealing with it. It's all the people that have to use this highway all the time and that have to deal with it during a hurricane evacuation. And one of the things we queried the Bureau of Ocean Management about is the fact that when a hurricane hits the Gulf, currently we have 19,000 employees that work on the rigs offshore. They all have to be evacuated. They all have to come to shore. And they stuck on this highway with all their friends and relatives from Bayou Lafourche and Terrebonne. Terrebonne Parish alone has 50,000 people living south of the Intracoastal that have to evacuate. They're under mandatory evacuation. And that's the same for Lafourche Parish. Plaquemine Parish is in the same situation. All those people leave. They're not going to New Orleans anymore. They're heading through Lafayette, and Lafayette's a big traffic jam that really puts people in harm's way. Bad enough you leaving your home and wondering whether your dogs and cats and your house will be there when you get back. But then you're stuck on a highway for 10 hours. We need to do a better job, and Lafayette plays a major role in that. We certainly need to think beyond our own neighborhoods.
Did you want to have some closing remarks?
I would just like to say this, that organizations like this particular organization is very important to the community because it allows issues to be freely, openly discussed. You know, the same is true of Rotaries and other groups, but they play a very important role in the community, allowing citizens to be informed so that they can tell their neighbors and spread the word about what you've learned and how we can make better decisions as a community, as a state, and as a country. I want to stress that so much. At the meeting of the Chamber of Commerce in St. Martinville, Terry Landry was there, Representative Terry Landry. And he brought up a bill 2 years ago in the House. He was on the Transportation Committee at the House of Representatives to study this Tesh Ridge and improvement of the Evangeline Thruway. It involves putting 4 overpasses over the Thruway. The whole project, the Tesh Ridge and all that, their preliminary estimates would be around $600 million to improve the Thruway and to build the whole loop around. So he puts the plan together and gets it passed through the House of Representatives. And before he can get to the Senate, the Lafayette Chamber of Commerce comes knocking on his door. You got to take that out. We don't want that to happen. We don't want a road in this backward St. Martin Parish. We want it in Lafayette. It's going to be good. It's going to only shut down, 1,200 jobs, take 1,000 homes. But this is a great thing for Lafayette. What kind of nonsense is that? But anyway, so he sent it to hell. Maybe not directly, but in effect, he said, I'm going to put it in the Senate. Of course, the Lafayette Chamber went bombarded the Senate, got it stopped there. But it didn't end there. His daughter was fired the next day from UL. And his son was fired from Acadian Ambulance, only his son had a contractual agreement that they had to back out and keep him on hand. So, these are some rascals, these guys that are pushing this agenda to make that happen. To go take a person, these are very responsible people in South Louisiana, and to go take their job from UL, how can the chamber have that kind of impact and influence? No, we got a real problem if we can let the chamber, it's kind of like letting the tail wag the dog.
Thank you, Harold. We certainly want a round of applause. I've been asked, we have a gentleman from Lloyd's Hospital.
He's got a question.
Would you please come up?
Good evening. I'm a newcomer to the community, and I wonder why it is that the city government itself is not stepping up with the new mayor in place. What do you speculate going on there?
You know, what's driving this thing is engineering fees, contracts for public relations, and that's lots of money involved. And if you can keep it in Lafayette Parish, the politicians have control over what happens and who gets these contracts. And if you move it to another parish, you lose that control. And I think that's what's kind of driving this thing. Because you look at some of the alternatives being offered would go to the west, but they totally kept in Lafayette Parish. Nobody's talking about putting a loop to the west into Vermilion Parish. They don't want to go an acre into Vermilion Parish. So that's kind of, I think, driving us. And, you know, the community should be demanding a cleanup of that rail yard. It is our water and our bayou that's being challenged. The community communities all over the country have demanded this of the rail yard, of the rail companies. 238 sites are currently being cleaned up, yards just like this all over the country. So the community certainly, you know, is at fault for not demanding and requiring it. Again, like Douglas Traps, he realized that public health has to be his number one responsibility as an elected official. And we should be convincing the present politicians of the same attitude.
Well, Ronald, thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate all the Harold, excuse me, Harold, but this gentleman here, Mr. Wright, has asked me about whether or not this group would be willing to take a test on the Constitution and the bylaws. And so he said the best way to do that, Carol, is to ask them. So I am asking, would you attend a meeting sometime in the future? And I think it's 100 questions, if I remember correctly.
It's the same quiz that all immigrants have to pass to become citizens. It's 100 questions that all citizens, and we're trying to get a law passed that all public officials have to do the same thing.
Well, anyhow, just as a quick answer, we're not going to make you sign an affidavit or anything, but would you raise your right hand or raise your hand if you would at least attend that meeting and be willing to participate in the 100 questions? Mr. Ray, I see 3 over here, 4, 5, 6, 7. Don't be bashful. I can see some of y'all are scared of tests. Got 9.
Nobody's going to know how you do it but you.
All right. Well, sometime in the future, we're looking at 10. We'll certainly let you know. We got most of you guys' emails, and it would be interesting to see if we can pass that test. So we'll attempt to do that sometime in the future. Before we leave, I want to do it.
Bring up a news item.
Yes, sir.
Tomorrow, the state is going to be blessed with the presence of Obama. He's going to be in the 10th Soil Wildlife Preserve to delist the Louisiana black bear. And, you know, I'm kind of appalled that he's going to show up. But that's what the rumor mill has, that he will be there to downlist the Louisiana black bear. And been involved in that issue since '87. I filed a petition to list it. They wouldn't do it. We filed a lawsuit with Defenders of Wildlife that resulted in a listing. They wouldn't list critical habitat, so University of Colorado volunteered their legal staff to come sue them again, and we prevailed, so they listed critical habitat. And we started with 350 bear. In 1987, that was the best guesstimates and estimates. Right now, the estimates are 500 to 600. And we're saying, well, why the hell are you doing this? You know, we have a long ways to go before we can say we have successfully saved the Louisiana bear. And if you pick up the Backpacker magazine, it has a whole article about it. It's very timely. This month's Backpacker has an article about it. So all I can say, we'll probably be back in court. And I asked the attorneys today, if Obama's going to do the delisting, can we depose him?
He's a damn blank.
I've been kind of reading a little bit about the black bear issue. My question is, does the Louisiana black bear have any predators besides human beings?
No, they're the king of the woods. Louisiana bear is much bigger than an American bear. This was the bear that Teddy Roosevelt came and hunted, and the guy caught a bear, a little cub, and tied it to a tree and brought the president over to shoot it. And the president said, "Oh no, you know, I'm not gonna hunt and shoot a bear tied up to a tree, especially a little cub." It was from that incident that a cartoon was made up about it, and some toy manufacturer in Ohio got a hold of the president and asked to make a toy bear, Teddy's Bear. That's how the Teddy Bear was. And so the American bear will weigh 200, male, 200 to 275. And the Louisiana bear goes 325 to 650. A grizzly is from 600 to 900. So a big Louisiana bear is right at the range of a smaller grizzly. And all the records of the Louisiana bear, there's been no incident of human entry from a Louisiana bear. They're unique, they're generally nocturnal, and they shy away from people. They don't have anything to do with people. And it's a beautiful big animal creature that is a symbol of wildness in the South. And it goes back to Teddy Roosevelt hunting it. And it deals with the reason a lot of them are gone is because we just tore down the bottomland hardwood swamps. We started with 26 million acres in Arkansas, western Mississippi, and eastern Louisiana. We're down to about 2 million acres. That's the major problem. We destroyed all their habitat. And we did that on the taxpayers' dollars. We mowed down those trees to plant soybeans and cotton and corn. And they finally woke up in the 80s, realized that we should be paying people to tear down all the bottomland hardwoods. They're trying to put some of this back, but that's a long way from happening.
The big cats don't attack?
No, they have no natural enemies. No, nothing. They're the king of the woods, for sure.
That's good.
Well, while Roslyn is walking back to meet Vic, I just want to tell everyone here that they are celebrating 2 events today. Miss Roslyn's birthday is today, I believe. Happy birthday. And
68, but not 16.
and they're also, their wedding anniversary is today. So. Anyhow, without any more questions, we have, I think, had a pretty good program. 2 weeks from the night, the 21st. Don Aguilar, just want to remind you all, you need to come. Obviously going to be important because we've got a big educational issue in the parish of Lafayette. Hopefully we get some answers, and we want to thank you all for being here this evening. Thanks again, Mr. Harold.
Apologize for being late.
Hey, no problem. Hey, you were doing the important thing. I'm sure.